Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
Okay, thanks. So Matt Diserio, co-founder, Water Asset Management. All we've done for the last nearly 2 decades, is invest globally in all different kinds of companies that ensure water quality and water supply. So everything from regulated water and wastewater utilities to all the different kinds of companies that make, the pipes, the pumps, the meters, the treatment, the technology. We're a very active water rights investor, both in Australia and in the United States. And we look, like everybody on this call, we've seen how colossal water problems can be, but there's not a water problem on Earth that's not solvable. And what's required is capital, competence, and the will to act. And when we're big believers. We've been working with Hubert, consistently for the last few years around the importance of regulation. And by regulation, I'm going to be very specific, because regulation can mean a lot of things. The regulation we're talking about that we believe is really the magic bullet, because we've invested successfully, by the way, for all these years in places, whether it's the US or the UK or Chile or Brazil or the Philippines or Italy, Australia. It's regulation. That is the magic bullet. We get asked all the time, oh, what's the technology or product that's going to, be the magic bullet to solve water? The magic bullet is the right regulation. And the kind of regulation that I'm talking about is the regulation that provides transparency, long duration certainty, and long duration opportunity and regulatory certainty to large scale capital, because that's what large scale capital requires in order to be committed. And the government funding, I would encourage this group to really focus the government funding on spending not to necessarily fund water infrastructure, but initially spend government funding and development funding to develop projects, develop assets, I should say, that are available, and then most importantly, develop the regulation. And the regulation I'm talking about, as I said, it exists already. It exists all over the world. And what we can do here is really kind of selectively kind of cherry pick the best aspects of that regulation from Ofwat, from our CESP, from the Public Utility Commissions in the United States, and consolidate them. There is no better business anywhere to invest in for long duration capital, i.e. pension type capital, than an investor owned water and wastewater utility that exists in a constructive, transparent, durable regulatory framework. There's no better business. Why? Because it's a monopoly. Typically, these monopolies are allowed and regulated through tariffs to earn roughly a 10% return on equity that is essentially indexed to inflation. I mean, people on this call, think about how hard it is to earn a real 10 for decades, let alone for 1 year. That's what the regulation does. That's what the regulation incentivizes. And it does so in a very transparent, that's the key, transparency and accountability. And that's what is, I mean, look, none of it's perfect, but it works. And and the key is to make sure that it's iterative. That's where regulation falls down, when it's not dynamic and it's not iterative. One of the things we say is that the pipes, the pumps, by the way, the leaky pipes, the broken pumps that need to be repaired, the unreliable, needs to be improved water supply in California or in the UK or in Brazil. It's the same set of assets and the same set of circumstances as those assets in South Africa. The difference between why hundreds of billions of capital flows to some places and doesn't flow to places on the continent, it's not the assets. They're the same assets. The customers, they're the same people. What's the difference? The difference is the regulatory overlay, the regulatory framework. When the capital sees and is comfortable with that regulatory framework, it flows in that direction. And that regulatory framework, to be successful, as I mentioned, it has to it has to deal with some very, very critical issues. And there's techniques. For example, foundational is universal metering. Secondly is full cost pricing. In other words, the tariffs need to be set in a way that covers all the costs, the operating costs, the capital costs, the debt and equity costs, the cost of ensuring reliability. Typically, when we say that, then people respond, well, gee, what about people that can't afford it? Well, that's where you use tiered volumetric pricing. So for the first 100 gallons, it's a penny a gallon. The next 100 gallons, it's 2 pennies a gallon. If you're using 10,000 gallons, it's 10 cents a gallon. And again, I'm just kind of throwing those numbers around just to make the point where you can create these mechanisms, especially with smart metering, that enable that kind of pricing to also be dynamic. There's very interesting and innovative ownership structures that bring the ratepayers into actually the ownership of these, because there's no better asset on earth, as I keep saying, if you get it right. And there's no reason that you can create incentives through mutualization types of ownership structures along with institutional pension fund type ownership, so that wealth creation is shared with the ratepayers. So, I mean, I can kind of go on and on. As you can see, we've got a lot of experience in this area. We've been investing in these kinds of businesses, for some of the largest institutions in the world for decades. Sovereign Wealth Fund in Norway, JP Morgan. I mean, those are our partners. That's our perspective really on the way to kind of proceed, and to make sure that any kind of a document that gets shared is very specific and very focused, not just on regulation broadly, but on the kind of regulation that has proven itself to attract hundreds of billions of dollars of capital, not only in the developed world, but in some of the emerging markets on earth, and have done so consistently for decades, profitably for investors and beneficially for ratepayers.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.